I'm Fernando Alonso, and I'm here to stay.
So Fernando Alonso and Aston Martin have signed a multi-year contract extension, and after months of deliberation, talks of retirement, and possibly behind the scene assessing their options, the two parties decided that it was best to work together and try to achieve the best possible result in the new technical regulations. Now there have been talks, there have been rumors, and Alonso has been linked with multiple teams. He has been linked with Red Bull. Remember in Bahrain, Flavio Briatore talking to the Red Bull camp. Then we also had Alonso linked with Mercedes to replace Lewis Hamilton. And at the same time, there were reports of Aston Martin offering a mega contract to Adrian Newey to possibly lure Max Verstappen into the fold. Well, after all the deliberations, all the conversations, and all the efforts that were made behind the scenes, we have these two parties committing to a future where they try to win the championship together. Now, in my view, this was never in doubt. The Alonso Aston Martin partnership was always going to extend their contract. Here's why. Now, the first reason is that neither of them had a better option on the table. Now, in case of Fernando Alonso, again, if he has to move on from Aston Martin, there are possibly 4 teams that he could have gone to: McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull, and Mercedes. Now, McLaren and Ferrari are booked already. They have their drivers for next season, and the drivers are there on a multi-year contract. That leaves us with Mercedes and Red Bull. Now, in my view, Mercedes is a team that is possibly on a downward trajectory. Toto Wolff has no idea on how to revive the team, and I've even asked questions in my previous video that whether Toto Wolff is the right man to lead the Mercedes revival. At this moment, if I have to pick a team out of the top 5 who is least likely to have a revival in 2026, possibly it's going to be Mercedes. Now, talking about Red Bull, well, there were conversations. It's quite obvious that there were a few conversations that were had between the Alonso camp and the Red Bull camp. In the end, these conversations were part of the political power play that was going on, either through Horner or Marco. But if Red Bull is looking at a long-term future, and if Max Verstappen is part of it, then the team is not going to have 2 alphas in the same team. If Max Verstappen is going to continue, Alonso is not going to come. And by the looks of it, things have settled down at Red Bull. And once that happened, the door shut for Alonso. And hence, I think we saw him sign the contract with Aston Martin. Now, talking about Aston Martin as well, because it's not only Alonso. For Aston Martin, I think the only option, the only better driver who was possibly on the market or who could have been on the market was Max Verstappen. Other than Max, Aston Martin did not have a better option than Fernando Alonso on the grid. Almost every other driver is under contract. And of course, there are quite a few that would suggest Carlos Sainz. But if I'm being honest, I will never pick Carlos Sainz over Fernando Alonso. Alonso is an elite talent, and Carlos Sainz is probably a step below that. Next up, the second reason was, well, Fernando Alonso is still an elite talent. Now, when first of all Alonso started talking about the retirement thing, it confused quite a few people because Alonso has been someone who has been very motivated when it comes to sticking to Formula 1 and achieving possibly a 3rd world championship. When he started talking about retirement, and maybe if he felt that the level of driving might not be there, I think the first 4 races were enough to show that Fernando Alonso is still one of the top drivers in F1. Let's just take a look at what he's done in the first 4 races. In the first race, he put the Aston Martin on the second row. In the second race, he held off George Russell pretty much throughout the second stint, even though Mercedes was probably a faster car at that track. Now at Australia, we know the crash happened on the last lap, but before the crash, Alonso drove brilliantly. He shadowed Sergio Perez earlier in the race, and then later in the race, he was pretty much keeping George Russell behind him, and of course there were a few tactics involved, but he was still doing a brilliant job at that. Finally, in the 4th race in Japan, I think that was a masterclass. In my view, I gave him a rating of 10 out of 10 for that race weekend because he maximized and possibly overachieved from whatever the Aston Martin could have delivered. In my view, that Aston Martin should not have finished ahead of a McLaren or a Mercedes because both cars were probably quicker. But the way Alonso toyed with Oscar Piastri in the later stages, and then pretty much had George Russell as well as a part of the DRS train, that was just brilliant driving. And if there was ever any doubt that Alonso was about to lose a bit of his skill as he starts to age, then that particular race, it just proved all doubters wrong. Alonso was still at the top of his game, and if he had any doubts of retiring because he was starting to age, then those doubts would have vanished after that particular weekend. Finally, now looking at the other side of the coin, and we had Aston Martin, and let's not discount the kind of investment Lawrence Stroll has put into the project. The team will have a Honda power unit, and that Honda power unit is going to be impressive. Then the team will also have a new wind tunnel. By the time we get to 2026, the team should be a well-oiled machinery, and there will be no vestige of it being a customer team. Aston Martin will be a full-fledged works operation, and when you have something like that, you have a team that is potentially capable of fighting for the title. And just to add to all of this, people like Dan Fallows, someone who worked for a long time at Red Bull, you just have to assume that all the ingredients are in place, and what's needed is the team to just gel together and maybe take some more time to become a more cohesive unit. In terms of picking a team that could possibly be a contender in 2026, I for one cannot discount Aston Martin. That team has seen a lot of investment from Lawrence Stroll, and if the Honda power unit is good, which ideally it should be because now the Japanese brand has understood how the entire thing works. So yes, when it came to extending the partnership beyond 2024 to 2025, 2026, and who knows how long Alonso stays, I think Alonso made a great choice, and I think for both Alonso and Aston Martin, this was on the cards. The partnership has been working brilliantly. He already got 8 podiums last season. All the elements are in place. It would not have made sense for him to leave the project now, and even for Aston Martin, it would not have made sense to go for someone else. So yeah, that's my view. What do you guys think? Do let me know what you think. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.